Hello, welcome to another episode of the Paragliding Debrief. I am super excited about this one today. We are being joined by Bruce Goldsmith, the creator, the founder of BGD Paragliders, another national treasure in the British free-flying scene. Has been a British and world champion in both hang gliding and paragliding. So much to come up on the show, so many different topics we cover. We delve right back into the early days of Bruce's flying career when he was flying hang gliders before paragliding had even been or become a thing. Super interesting to hear a little bit more about the world of hang gliding, how it all started, the heroes, quite frankly, that got us to where we are today in the free flight world. Loads of hints and tips as well for pilots. Some super interesting content coming your way. So why don't you sit back, relax, and join us for another episode of the Paragliding Debrief with Bruce Goldsmith. Okay, so here we are. I'm sat with Bruce Goldsmith. I'm in the south of France. How are you, Bruce? Nice to see you.
I'm very well. Welcome to my house.
Thank you very much.
Perched on top of a mountain.
A beautiful house it is too. In fact, we've just had a dip in the pool.
I think a lot of pilots like to have a house which is perched on top of a mountain.
Yes. And not too far away from launch. We were up at Gordon this morning.
Yeah.
And it shares the same view that you can see from Gordon. Absolutely stunning place.
Yeah, this house is 500 metres above the sea level. And Gordon takeoff is 1,000, so It's just halfway up.
Yeah. I've been wanting to do this with you for ages, Bruce. I was here about a month and a half ago, just down the road doing one with Russ, and I've been desperate to have a sit-down chat with you.
Yeah, we're right next door to each other, Russell and I.
Yes, but we're almost neighbours.
And BGD, we're neighbours.
Yeah. And there's so much I want to talk about today, Bruce. I mean, I don't really know where to start. I guess what we want to do is go right back, way back to the beginning. So I believe you started in hang gliding in the year I was born, 1979. So you've been in it for the whole way, as it were.
Yeah, 44 years flying. That would be, that's quite a long time.
Yeah,
it makes me feel old. So I started hang gliding when I went to London University, Imperial College London, and there was a hang gliding club there that was really active, and they had relationships with different schools round and about, and I learnt with the Dover and Folkestone Club. Ted Salisbury was the name of the instructor. And I used to catch the train down from the centre of London, go down and fly on those local sites. Crete Hill, I think, was the site we used to fly at mostly. I'm not so sure it's still a current flying site. I don't think so.
No, it's not what I've heard of in that area, to be honest, no.
On the North Downs. And
it was all hang gliding in those days. Paragliding hadn't really
paragliding didn't exist. No, wow. not at all. And hang gliding had only been going for around 10 years at that time.
Yeah.
So so I started hang gliding when I was 19 at London University, and then like a year after I started hang gliding, Brian Milton moved in as my next door neighbour. And that really gave me a big boost because he was British team manager at the time. Okay. And very active in the association. He was raising sponsorship for the British team, and he's a very active, dynamic guy. So he was doing all sorts of interesting stuff. Yeah. And funnily, at that time, there was more sponsorship in hang gliding than there is now.
Really?
It was much more mainstream in those times because they were regarded as just madmen, wild madmen doing crazy stuff. And it was so new and exciting. And, it was, Johnny Walker Whiskey was sponsoring hang gliders and, all kinds of, there was Newton Aycliffe was a town and they were sponsoring hang glider, the British team. And there was all this kind of sponsorship going on, which you really don't see now, neither in paragliding nor in hang gliding, Yeah. And it's funny to think that, there was actually more sponsorship and more media activity around hang gliding in those days. And it's actually sort of died down over the years, if anything.
Which is sad to see, you're right. I mean, you don't see half as many hang gliders now than I used to see 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Where I live in Alglen Isles, we used to have a lot of hang gliders there. But slowly but surely, paragliding seems to be taking over. Now, back in the day, where was hang gliding actually invented?
Yeah, it was in California.
It was in California?
Yeah, right. In California with Rogallo, who was working for NASA at the time, and he had this what they called the plastic bamboo butterflies. So they had plastic sheeting on a bamboo frame, and they were called hang looses because they had no harness. They were just hanging with the bamboo frame under their armpits and weight shifting, going down the sand dunes. And that was the very early time. So I think that was 1969, something like that. So I started like 10 years after that. And it was quite a meteoric time of progression and a very fast advance in the technology of the gliders as well over that period of 10 years. It was huge changes.
And considering, like, looking back now, how much your career has come on in those 44 years. Did you know, were you bitten by the bug immediately? Did you know once you got into that kind of free flight? I mean, there wasn't paragliding at the time, it was hang gliding, but did you know that this was going to be for you, that you were going to pursue it and take
Well, I was trained as a civil engineer, so I did do civil engineering for about 10 years.
Yeah.
I did civil engineering at university and then carried on to be a chartered engineer. And, I thought that I would be an engineer and just do hang gliding part-time, but I got into the British team pretty quickly, sort of 1985, 84, 85, and started to travel the world, and hang gliding got more and more important to me. Mm-hmm. And what really pushed me over into being a professional pilot was Brian Milton got a sponsorship deal for me from Newsweek magazine. Right. So I had Newsweeks right across my hang glider, and I was able to fly all around the world. So I gave up working as an engineer and just flew full time for Newsweek magazine.
And then from doing that, you also got into, was it design and manufacture of hang gliders before you started with the paragliders?
Yes, yeah. I worked as I got that sponsorship, working as a competition pilot. I also was flying Airwave at the time and started to get involved with the design of the Airwave hang gliders. And worked together with John Pendry and Rob Whittle in Airwave. And so I was working on the Isle of Wight, working for the Airwave factory, and so half the time developing gliders, half the time doing competitions all around the world.
Yeah, and you became world champion in hang gliding, I believe.
Yeah, I was... well, actually, they actually ran a series called the... I forgot what it's called. We actually ran a series called the Super League, which was a bit like the PwC is now for hang gliding. And this was actually started by Brian Milton, so my good friend Brian. And it was like a professional series for the top level professional pilots. And they had a series of 6 competitions around the world. And then at the end of that, there was declared a winner, and that was me for the first serious year of the Super League.
And was that cross-country tasks? That was all
yes, that was all cross-country flying, yeah.
So back in the day then, I would imagine you'd have had to take a camera. Was it those days where you had to take a picture of where you were, and when you landed, a picture of all 4 sides, and then you had to take your reel of film up to the...
Yes, it was very difficult. And you had 2 cameras, so you had to take 2 pictures with 2 cameras of each thing, and... you were flying with a map in front of you as well. That was probably the hardest thing, was the map reading, and you have to sort of cross-reference all your flying and navigation decisions with different map features, this village lined up with that church, giving you your position here and then looking the other way. And so, cross-referencing your position. Yeah. And then you have to take photographs of, if it was the turn point was a church, you'd have to go over the other side of the church. So the steep, you could see the backside of the building. And that had to be visible in the photographs. And you also had to photograph your competition number on the glider as well.
Right. Okay.
So it was very difficult, and there was a lot of people, all the time had problems with cameras, problems with not being in the right place with the right angle, or putting your finger in front of the lens, and also mechanical breakdown of the cameras. So it was really a big challenge to get that thing right all the time. Yeah. No, it was very difficult.
And compared to modern day hang gliders now, what kind of performance were you getting from those type of gliders back then? Has it evolved massively, or was there fairly good performance you could get out of them in those days?
Yeah, glide was about 12 to 1 at that time. Best glide was 12 to 1. And now I think they're up around 15, 16 to 1, something like that. So it's improved. Yeah. But I think more than anything, it's the ease of use of the hang gliders has improved a lot. Because then if you're flying slow, you could really not control the glider at all. Right. And when you're thermaling, it was very difficult, and you have to, to maintain control, and they would tip stall sometimes. And so you would be flying too slow to get a good sink rate. Then you couldn't turn, and then you would tip stall, and so they were twitchy, I would say, the gliders in those days. But now they're much more reliable and easier handling, and you can even handle them when the VG is on and things like that. So performance has improved, but I think it's the ease of use which is the main improvement.
When it comes to the subject of easy to use, then the paragliders started to come along. Then there kind of became this this partnership with hang gliding and paragliding. And at what point did you cross over? I mean, was it a case of if you're a hang glider pilot, the paragliders, and paraglider pilots look at hang glider pilots, it's almost two tribes? Or for you, was it a natural progression to move on to paragliding? Did you do both? How did that come about?
I did do both. I mean, they were regarded as very inferior at the beginning, but the progression came very fast in the advancement of the technology, and they've got. I mean, they're so impressive now. The way the gliders can fly. We'd never dreamt that they would ever get to the stage they are now. Where there's not actually such a huge difference between hang gliders and paragliders, and the speed we have now on paragliders is really impressive. Yeah. But when I started. Was probably 87 was my first flight on a paraglider. I was actually at the World Championships in Australia, and then I started Airwave paragliding department in like 1990, 91, and started to grow that. At that time, we were manufacturing all the hang gliders on the Isle of Wight and all the paragliders as well. We had a huge paragliding factory. And so we had a staff of over 100 people on the Isle of Wight.
Oh, wow,
working for
big operation.
Yeah, making hang gliders and making paragliders. Yes. And so that was quite interesting as well. It taught us how to actually, every detail of manufacture as well as design. Yeah. Whereas, nowadays, all the manufacturing is done in the Far East, and so to have first-hand knowledge of how to set up a production is really important and really interesting.
And how much different? I mean, you were in the design and fabrication of hang gliders, and then also paragliders as well. How much difference is there between designing for the layman, between designing a hang glider and designing a paraglider?
Yeah, it's really very, very different. Because all the problems are completely different. With a hang glider, for example, you would you put the batten into the sail to give you the aerofoil shape, and you could modify just by modifying the shape of the battens. And hang glider pilots are always and designers are always modifying the shape of the battens. You could have more thickness, a bit more reflex, and you could just play around with the shape of the sail. Well, with a paraglider, it's all sewn into the ribs, so you can't. So once you've made a glider, you can't change the shape of the ribs, of the profile, the aerodynamic profile. You can do a little bit by adjusting the line lengths, but then you end up with creases in the sail because the lines don't agree with the sail. And on a hang glider, you've got aluminium tubes giving you your main structure, and then you've got the interaction between the sail and the aluminium tube. So it's similar to a yacht mast, really. Yeah. So the flex in the mast is super important to the performance of the sail, and the same with a hang glider. Whereas with a paraglider, there is no spar, so everything is just defined by the sail and the lines. Yeah. So it's very, very different, absolutely different. And then the other big thing is the certification. It's with hang glider certification, it's all about pitch stability. And they put it on the vehicle and measure the tendency of the glider to tuck, because that was the biggest problem with hang glider design in the early days, that the gliders would go into what we call a luffing dive, which is just the nose would go down, and whatever you did, it would never come up again, and you just dive into the ground. Right. So that was the biggest problem with the early hang gliders. Yeah. And so then they started to, so they had to invent lots of technology to overcome that. So, luff lines and reflex in the profile, and then other kinds of structures in the sail to get over that problem. And all the certification was around that problem, whereas paraglider certification is mainly around collapses. And other things like spin tendency and stuff. But so and hang gliders don't collapse. So so you're just completely different. You couldn't be more different.
And did you say they used to put them on the back of a lorry? And
Yes.
run them down and get an airflow over them, I guess. And how did that work? How?
Yeah, well, we even at Airwave we had our own vehicle, which was a Jaguar XJS with a big fiberglass roof on it, and you put the hang glider up on the top of the vehicle, and at lower speeds you could actually control it. You could have someone standing on the roof of the vehicle, and you can just move the bar, and as you pull the nose down, and you can feel if it's divergent. So that means you pull the nose down, and then it wants to just keep going down.
Yeah.
Or what is safe is when the nose wants to rise back up again.
Yes.
So you continually got the right bar pressure to return to normal flight.
Yeah.
Whereas it's divergent, it just goes faster and faster and more nose down until you crash. So.
Oof, and I imagine some pilots had to learn that the hard way.
Yeah, there was a lot of deaths. There was a lot of deaths like that. So, as I just say, they're very, very, very different in the technology and developing them as well. Completely different.
And then, at what point did the kind of hang gliding side of it die away for you, and the concentration become about paragliding?
Well, I started the paragliding section in 1990, and then by the time I sort of 92, 93, I was doing both paragliding competitions and hang gliding competitions, sort of mixed 50-50. And then I actually had a big scare in Owens Valley in 1993 during the World Championships flying hang gliders, where my hang glider tumbled over White Mountain at 20,000 feet. And I fell on top of the glider and the leading edge broke, and I was span down and crashed into the top of the mountain.
Oh God! I can't get my words out. I'm in shock. I'm trying to imagine that, because when they go, they go very fast.
Yeah, it's like a sycamore leaf, just spinning around
I've
upside
seen
down
some
with
videos.
a broken leading edge.
And there was no chance that you did. Did you have?
Yeah, I threw the rescue,
Right.
and I just remember going down near the peak with quite a high sink rate, because the peak is really high, and it's like 13,000 feet, I believe, something like that, and I just remember going under the rescue with a very high sink rate, and I was like face first down under the equipment, under the wreckage. And I just remember it going rocks, 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 snow, rocks, 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 snow, rocks, 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 snow hit. And I just hit in the snow, and I was fine, And but there was in that competition there was quite a lot of accidents like that. Robin Hamilton was a very good friend of mine, and he had the same crash a couple of days later, and he hit the rocks and managed. His nose went like a tomato and just exploded across his face. So that was very
And was that
very
just
difficult.
strength of the conditions? I mean, Owens Valley has a reputation for being an incredibly committed place. I mean, people get to those kind of altitudes. Were you flying with oxygen then?
Yes, I
When you were-
was. Yeah. I was flying with a little tube in the nose, for oxygen, and we were flying for like 5 hours above 15,000 feet. Above 16,000 feet, you really have to start using oxygen, and it's quite physical to fly a hang glider as well.
Yeah.
So it's paragliding is less physical. You're basically sitting there with two toggles. With hang gliding, you're really using your arms to move your whole weight around, and especially if the hang gliders were really stiff and difficult to control.
Yeah.
So you needed the oxygen to keep yourself conscious and alert. So anyway, I ended up crashing on the mountain in the snow, and then the rescue inflated again because the conditions are super radical, and took me off again under the wreckage.
Oh my gosh!
And I unclipped my harness, jumped out, and the hang glider with the rescue went all the way up to the peak of the mountain, and then the rescue fell one side and the wreckage fell on the other.
And what happened then? I mean, did you ever get that back again, or is that something that
it stayed up
it's
there?
a memorial up there for?
Well, actually, the Russian team a few days later tried to get it, but they didn't manage. It was super high and in the snow and very difficult conditions, and they didn't have helicopter rescue there in those times.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting up there, and the officials sort of flew past in a Cessna and waved at me, and I was like, oh, that's really useful. What are we going to do now? Yeah. And so I ended up walking down the mountain, and arrived at the main road. First sort of civilization at the bottom at 6 a.m.
Wow.
And they phoned in to the organisation, the British team, And the British team sent a car to me. They took me straight to takeoff, where they'd rigged another hang glider for me to set off on the next task the next day. Yes.
Wow.
So,
and how did you feel?
Off straight off. I didn't fly so well the next day, I must admit.
Yeah. Wow.
But that was one crazy competition. So after that, I stopped doing the hang gliding competitions and switched to paragliding only competitions. Right. So I was also a British paragliding champion and hang gliding champion as well at the same time.
And there's not, I think, is it Dean Crosby was another one who had that title. And did Robbie Whittle have it as well?
Yes.
Because there's a very elite club of you guys that have had world championships and British championships in both disciplines.
John Pendry as well.
That's correct, yes.
So it was 93 when I switched to doing only paragliding.
Okay. And so that was a conscious decision then to leave hang gliding alone and just concentrate fully on paragliding. So
yes, yeah.
You had Airwave at the time?
Yes.
And so I remember learning to fly on an Airwave wave. It was one of my first ever. I had a Mojo 1 and an Airwave wave. I did my EP and CP on the combination of those two gliders. So I always have quite an affection thinking back of Airwave, because, the first glider you fly on when you first do your time, and it's keeping you alive in your head while you're doing your EPCP. So have a real affinity to Airwave and the Mojo 1 at the time.
Yeah, I designed all the Airwave gliders over the years.
Yeah. And the Mustang, the Airwave Mustang.
Yes.
The first kind, it was like a kind of freestyle, action style glider. I remember having a flight on one of those. A fantastic machine, super energetic.
Yes.
A very fun machine to fly. That was my first kind of taste of a glider with a bit of acrobatic performance. And that was the first one I got my teeth stuck into. And so from there, it was just more competing. And
yes, I was competing for really up to 2007 when I won the World Paragliding Championships. Yeah. But by then, 2007, I was 47, so I was one of the oldest competitors at that time. Yeah. So I kind of, gave up competitive paragliding around that time, really. It's also, once you've won the World Championships, what are you going to do that's better?
What do you do after? Absolutely, yes. And
so retire at the top.
The kind of flying that's needed. So we have... we're in a brilliant position at the moment where the sport is expanding hugely. It's starting to become a lot more popular. There's a lot more people getting into it. The technology's gone a lot better. But the flying techniques, for example, the flying techniques that you would have used back in the late 90s, early 2000s to do cross-country. I mean, I know we have better performing gliders now, but one thing I used to love is reading all your articles in Cross Country magazine. You have an incredible ability to understand the technical side. And what would be your opinion now of how it is to fly gliders, how it is to make cross-country flights? The skill and everything is still exactly the same as things change. I don't know if I'm making sense by the way I'm asking that.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a few articles about brake position and how this has changed over the years because, in the early days, people used to fly around with just the brakes at their shoulders the whole time and just sit on the ridge in that one position. And that was just fine because at the time it would give you the best sink rate and you could stay up quite easily. And the gliders also had a lot more lines, a lot more drag, and so they were a lot more damped, And so just to fly around that position actually worked very well, and it was taught by all the schools as a standard way of flying. But things have changed over the last few years. Gliders fly a lot better hands up. And also because of what's been going on in SIV has changed things quite a lot, and certification has changed things quite a bit as well. Because in SIV, if you do all your SIV with your hands at your shoulders, you're going to get in big trouble. Yeah. The gliders don't recover, and in fact, it changes an ENA glider into an END. Right. Okay. Because if it's then shoot. Because they will shoot. Yeah, they will shoot. And a lot of gliders will not recover from deep stall with if you keep your hands at that position. And a lot of people just kind of, floating around on the ridge, keeping their hands in that position, and they just if something happens, that's their neutral position, if you like. And they just go to that position. They don't realise that it changes an ENA glider into an END glider.
Yes. And this is something this is really interesting. I really wanted to clarify is you made a video where you're in Turkey talking about exactly this. And then some pilots are saying, so do I now fly with hands? The problem I think a lot of pilots have is they're not prepared to change their positions.
Yes.
During a flight, I will slow my glider down. I will speed my glider up. There are certain ways I will react to certain situations. Unfortunately, for some pilots, I think that there's very much a one position fits all. So I was flying down with my shoulders. Then I heard, actually, we should fly with hands all the way up. Now, in a really thermic air mass, for me, I wouldn't feel so comfortable just going through everything with my hands up. There are certain times I feel like I want to put a bit of pressure in the glider or I'm damping small pitches. But to clarify this reflex action that modern gliders have now, and what you mean, sort of when is the right time to have the hands up, when's the right time, so if it becomes
I think but talking about the reflex story is a bit of a red herring, I think. Right. Really is, it's not really related to the reflex in the glider. Even most gliders have a profile which is pretty much uncambered or maybe tiny bit of reflex but it's negligible, it's very, very small. It's not about flying. So this
isn't what the break up or break down is having an effect on per se.
Yes. On all profiles. It's not only the reflex profiles. And but there's several important subjects which you touching on here. Firstly, we talked about SIV. So we know for sure in SIV you don't want to have your hands at your shoulders. It's bad for your health. Yes. And so there, what you need to do is have your hands up, okay, to recover, and sometimes put brake on to stop a surge. Yes. And that's kind of quite clear. So if you always fly with your hands at your shoulders, then you might have a problem with SIV for a start, So that's obviously one thing that's clear. So then the second thing is that I think it came kind of from competition flying, but it's perhaps the best way to fly, is that normally you're either climbing or you're gliding. So when you're climbing, you've got brakes on, you're thermaling, and when you're gliding, you've got brakes off and you're gliding somewhere. Yes. And personally, when I'm flying, I'm doing that. I do that all the time. I'm either climbing or I'm gliding. So I've either got some brakes on to thermal or the brakes are off and I'm gliding. Mm-hmm. And when you're gliding, you should try and use as little brake as possible, obviously. And it's actually also true that when you're thermaling, it's good to use as little brake as possible too. Or very little brake, I think. So more weight shift, less brake is a very efficient way to climb. So there's kind of different fields of flying, if you like. There's the SIV kind of thing, and then there's the free flying kind of thing as well. Also you see it a lot with acro flying as well. That it's very much brakes on, brakes off, brakes on, brakes off. No one is putting the brakes at the shoulders.
No,
for anything.
You're absolutely right.
For anything,
You're absolutely right.
Yes. So it's when you're looking at the flying, there's different fields of flying, and it's a kind of common theme which runs between the different fields of flying.
And in a very strong thermic air mass, are you still flying hands up? Or are you flying with a bit of pressure then in the glider? How would you fly in a very bumpy sort of air mass? What then are you?
I'm trying to minimise the movements of the glider.
Right.
With as little. So ideally the glider should not move from above your head.
Yeah.
And you use as little movement as possible to keep the glider in that position.
Yeah. But it's manipulating the brakes all the time. It's not sitting there with that one position.
No, not sitting there in one position. No, absolutely not.
Because I think that's a common trap that a lot of pilots are falling into.
Right.
Very afraid of using the whole brake range of the glider. They sit there with that little bit of pressure on. And there seemed to, I just find there seems
one other thing that's very interesting is that, you can, if you put too much brake, you stall the glider. But if you put a dynamic brake input, so you quickly put the brakes down, you can put them twice as low as if you're just in a static position. Yes?
Yeah.
And so this means that if there's something strong happening to the glider, you can put a quick pump in and you can pump further, harder and quicker. It's much more effective than, just having the brakes at a medium position to a bit lower medium position.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's just ineffective to do that.
Yeah.
So by having your brakes higher, it gives you more power to pull them harder.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you actually have more brake authority. And the other thing is that when you have the glider just hands up full of air, when you pump, then the whole glider is completely full of air. And when you put your hands down, some air escapes out of the glider. But so there's more air in the glider to start with,
Yeah.
So you've actually got more authority to stop a front collapse or to stop a collapse by pumping the brakes from a higher position rather than pumping from a middle position. Do you see what I mean?
I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So it gives you more authority, more power, and more safety because of that. But it does require you to be dynamic with the brakes and move them around. But I'm just saying you're moving from a higher position.
Yes.
Rather than moving from a neutral, which is near your shoulders or your ears.
Yeah. And
That's
it's
the difference.
Not being timid with the brakes. A lot of pilots are a little bit afraid of the brakes. It's not being timid to put a big rail. Like you say, you can come deeper.
But don't hold it
quicker, you don't hold.
Don't hold it at all.
Exactly. You can deal with the pitch, you can deal with the problem, back to normal or release back to your normal position and away you go. And I think it's just really nice to hear you say that, because there's a lot of pilots who aren't sure, is that the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do, and I come across a lot of misleading information on the hill, and it's a real minefield, especially for new pilots coming through, on what advice they hear, what advice they take. And it's nice to hear someone, with a proven track record like yourself clear that up and say it's okay. We do have a good, decent brake range on the glider. That's what it's there for.
And perhaps another thing that's important is, is the brake length as well. How it's bad to overshorten the brakes on the glider, because again, it stops them from recovering properly from deep stall. It makes them more shooty if the brakes are too short, and it just reduces your range, your dynamic range that you've got to be able to control the glider.
Yeah. And tactics wise, when you're approaching a cross country flight, I mean, is there any kind of advice you could give to the budding cross-country pilot in terms of how to fly a day? Like the speed to fly concept. What's your interpretation of the speed to fly concept? Because that's another thing that pilots get a little bit confused. It's a term that everyone's heard about, but I think a term that not necessarily everybody understands.
Yeah, it's difficult to make a simple rule because it depends a lot on the glider, your experience. The biggest aspect for speed to fly is the wind, so if you're flying into a headwind, you're going to have to fly fast, really fast, probably full speed the whole time. Yeah. And if you're flying downwind, then you can fly slower and perhaps, even normally the best glide is with a little bit of bar on. So if you're flying downwind, then, you just might use 20% of speed bar. But if you're flying upwind, the same wind, you're on full bar the whole time.
Yeah. And speed bar is another thing that pilots worry about, or not worry about, but are confused whether to use it, whether to not. What's your advice to people using speed bars? On especially sort of, you've got an A glider, a B glider, a C glider, D glider. What's your opinion on different ranges of gliders as to how effective or useful the speed bar is?
I think one thing that is really important is to control the pitch of the glider. As I said, you need to have the glider stable above your head. And when you use the speed bar, it adds more complexity to that problem. So normally when you apply the bar, then the glider shoots forward and then you catch up with the glider. So you're ending into a small oscillation. And so I think it's really important to try to control your application of the speed bar so that you minimize those oscillations. So I often, when I'm putting on a speed bar, for instance, I put half on, then when the glider shoots forward, I put then the other half, and it negates the first pitch movement, which was started by putting on the first half. Yeah. So you put half on, and the glider surges, and then you put the second half on, and the glider goes back to the original neutral position. And I think controlling pitch you with the use of the speed bar is really, really useful. And it's what, back riser steering is all about as well.
This is going to be my next question. So are you're a fan? You do the back riser steering? It's something I do. I use all the time. If I'm on bar, I'm on the back risers.
Yes.
But again, with your proven comp track record, it's something you would do as well?
Yes.
It's the way you personally fly, because some people say, well, I know you say all this, but how do you fly, Yes. And it is how you fly as well.
But especially with competition gliders, it works really well with competition gliders when because the competition gliders want to fly, they need to fly fast. They're designed to fly fast the whole time. And then it's really useful to be able to use the back riser steering. And, the ENA gliders, it's really not very important to use the back riser steering. It doesn't really work very well because the gliders are not as fast and they're not as dynamic. So, yeah, it depends on the level of the glider more than anything.
Right, okay. And having confidence in the fact that because you've got a bar, if you're on an ENA or a B, you've got enough security in the wing not to be too... people are like, I don't want to go full bugs. I'll have a big front collapse, and people are very nervous. Again, not quite sure what the result will be of that. And so pilots are like, do I? Or I wouldn't go on full. I wouldn't touch your bar if I were you. It's like putting a hand grenade in your leading edge. And I've heard all these quite comical responses from various places. So again, your advice.
I mean, if you're worried about it, you need to just practice, get more experience, and then you answer your own questions by gathering experience. Yeah,
absolutely.
To know what your glider can take according to the turbulence and the bar position.
Yeah,
it's different for everybody and every glider and every setup. It's really different.
And how much have you seen the security of gliders change? I mean, you've literally seen paragliding since its birth almost, and you've been involved in the design process again since almost its birth. So how much have you seen gliders change? I mean, you've had a big hand in the fact that gliders have changed. You've been one of the ones responsible for making that happen. But how different are modern day gliders now compared to what you were flying in the original days?
One interesting point that people don't really talk about is we used to only have one glider in the whole range. There were no mountain gliders. We didn't even have a competition glider. We just had one.
Yeah.
At the beginning, we had the Black Magic, and we had the Voodoo shortly after that. And we were flying competitions with it. We were learning on it. All the flying was just, we only even had one size most of the time.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah. One glider, one size. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest changes. There's the diversification of paragliding now.
Yeah.
Into all kinds of different, light gliders, mountain hike and fly gliders, paramotor gliders, acro gliders. Yeah. It's speed riding gliders, all kinds of, the diversity is probably the biggest difference. It's just a huge change. And the gliders are constantly improving in terms of safety and performance all the time. Yeah. And you see it every year. It's quite amazing. You think it's going to stop, but I don't think so, because it's. I often say it's like you think that cars are not evolving. Cars have been around 100 years, and you can see how they've, how they're still evolving every year. In quite a serious way, and it's been 120 years since the cars have been around. And with paragliding, we're on 30 years or so, 35 years. And it's the nature of the paraglider that it's such a complex thing to design as well, which is really which makes it so interesting to work on the design.
And is there a finite point we can get to? I mean, I guess we need the glider to be able to fold away, go up on our back. It has to be convenient. It has to be safe, obviously. I mean, is there a finite point where we'll just get to the end of the advancements we can make, or do you think there's always going to be something that we can keep? Where do the next improvements come from? So what's in your mind now of the future generations of gliders?
Well, if I knew that, I wouldn't tell you anyway.
It was a nice try.
Yeah, it's a nice try. But it's always surprising, and we're always trying different concepts, like the glider we were flying today. Very different concept. Yeah. And we're just experimenting and trying to see what different concepts can bring, and how it can improve the development of the gliders.
It was something I really enjoyed today. I know I can't say too much about stuff. My lips are sealed, but I saw some really interesting things up on the hill. And it was really nice actually to see some different kind of concepts of the things you were trying out and the way it's going, and it was super fun to watch.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, that's what makes it so interesting. But I mean, now we're working so much on the computer simulations. Yeah, and that's, I don't know. Paragliding design was always very much a black art, and the computer simulations kind of brings it into the mainstream. That it's actually, you can begin to understand, deformations of the glider, what the aerofoils are, how they perform in with extreme amount of turbulence or some wrinkles on them, and it's very much still a really new field, even though everybody's putting on a huge amount of effort into it.
Yeah,
it's still a very new field, the paraglider simulation.
And how accurate are they? So obviously, you can have that, and then you've got to take the glider. You've got to test it. You've got to humanly pilot it and test it. But how close now are these simulations getting to be able to replicate what you're finding? When you make the prototype and you take it to the hill, how close now are they getting to be able to simulate a real life glider, as it were?
Well, for a long time we were only simulating hands-up flight, so trim speed flight. And, trim speed flight is only a very small part of real flying, Yeah. So now we're doing flight with brakes on and full speed flight as well. So we're doing 3 different phases of flight. And all the time we're finding surprises, things don't agree with what our simulation is, so then we go back and correct the simulation, and then maybe we correct the simulation for the brakes on flight, and then we find that the full speed flight prediction is then changed and not accurate anymore, and it's just a constant process that constant process of evolution and improving the technology to make the simulations better.
Yeah. And one thing I loved on the hill today is watching you fly. You still really enjoy it. Like just watching you fly, the passion, it's so nice to see after so long being involved in the sport. And
it doesn't get boring.
No,
it doesn't get boring.
Absolutely not. And it was
not
so
only
nice.
You've got every day is different. I've never seen a day like today. Every day is different.
Yeah.
And then you've got all the interest of flying different prototypes and different innovations, and there's really you're not running out of ideas on paraglider development for a long time to come.
Yeah. So you're still as passionate about it now as you've always been. I mean, just the smile on your face as you were messing around on launch today was fantastic.
So it certainly keeps me really, really excited.
And BGD, Bruce Goldsmith design. BGD, you started 2013, I believe.
Yes,
2013.
Well, we came up with the idea in Saint-Hilaire, so September 2012. That was when the idea of BGD was born. And then we started the company 1st of January 2013.
And I think, was it the Thaler was your first?
Yes, the Thaler was the first glider. Yeah. And I've worked. I actually created airwave paragliders, and then I created Ozone. Then I had a 2-year stint working at Advance. Went to Airwave as well, and now BGD. So I've worked for 5 brands over the last 40 years.
And the thing I loved with BGD, paragliding is a difficult market to get into now. Because you've been around, you've been in the designing world for so long. I guess you were always going to be accepted more than one of these small companies starting off that no one's heard of. But when you came into the scene, it was the colours of the glider that made you stand out. Where did the BGD theme of the colourful gliders because that's something, with all the jackets and everything as well, it's a real standout brand.
Yes,
And I think to begin with, some people were like, ooh, but it's really, people have really grown to love them, and it's a real thing now that makes you stand out from the rest. Where did that idea come from?
It was a combination of I think working between Anthony Green and my wife Adna, who's sales and marketing manager. And she was an artist, a manager of artists before. So she would, work with artists and sell their products. And I wouldn't really say an art dealer, because she would have a close working relationship with each artist, and then sell their products to, sell their paintings. And it was very much, I would say a very artistic kind of art director kind of thing. And so I think working and Anthony is like the artist that she was working with, and so between the two of them, they managed to produce some amazing artistic combinations. And every glider is like a piece of art, and it takes months and months of work to get each glider looking like a piece of art, and having a good aesthetic aesthetic design. So it's very much that relationship of kind of art manager and artist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really worked, and you can see a BGD from miles away. It's like when the Advance had the winglets. You could see a load of gliders silhouetted on a ridge. You could tell which one was the Advance. And now you can tell a BGD.
Yes.
And the colours of the clothing. And I think it was an absolute genius stroke coming into a competitive market already to have something that makes you stand out.
Yeah.
And then, gosh, since then, you've gone into, you've now got ENAs, EMBs, ENCs, Ds, the lightweight gliders. I flew the Alana.
Anda.
I keep calling it the Alana. Sorry, the Anda. I flew the Anda this morning, which superb.
Yes. Yeah.
Lovely glider. Super nice handling in ENA, lightweight glider, mountain hike and fly glider. Fantastic, superb bit of kit. So you've got a massive range.
Yeah, we also got the paramotoring stuff.
Yes, of course.
And kite surfing.
How'd you do the kite surfing as well? That I didn't.
We did that under the Airwave name.
Right. Okay.
Which, because I did buy the Airwave name a few years back, and Airwave is a very good name for kite surfing, because it fits perfectly with the sport.
Yeah.
So Airwave is run by the BGD company as well.
Yeah. And where does BGD go from here? From strength to strength, I imagine.
From strength to strength. Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, the big change now is, I'm 63, looking at retiring, and we've now bringing on a whole new young generation of people to work on development. So we've got Tom Lollies, and he's mainly working on computer simulations. And he's 27. We've got my son Tia, who's chief test pilot, and he's 25. We got Killian in the office as well. He's like 23. So the whole office they're all in their 20s, everybody. So really that's the big change at the moment, is switching over to a whole new, young, dynamic research and development team. So it's very interesting. And then, transmitting my idea of design over to that new team so they can, progress and continue in the same style.
Yeah. And it's a literally a family business, but also on a much bigger scale. One of the things that I love is how much you support the dealers around the world, and what a big family BGD feels like.
Yes.
I've just at the Acro Ball Festival in Galitzin, and there was a BGD tent there. Every festival I've been to this season, there's always BGD representation. We had the Boliteras Festival in my village of Algodonales. Big BGD presence there. So, and everyone I speak to, there's always, it sounds so silly, but you guys know everybody by their first name. And you talk to everybody like they're a member of the family. And that's something I've been super impressed with, having kind of got to know BGD over the last couple of years, especially with Blaze. What a lovely kind of fun environment. You guys get together, you have, it's a really fun, and I'm not just saying this because I've sat with you, and I think anyone would agree. It's a really nice kind of family feel. Lovely setup.
Yeah, it is, but I mean, how can I say? We mean it, We're not hard business people.
No, and it really shows.
It's something that's close to my heart.
Yeah. Well, it's lovely to see. Just the mood in the office this morning, going in, seeing what a close knit team everyone is, how lovely everyone is. Yeah, fantastic, Bruce. And advice for pilots? Anything advice wise? Anything you'd like to say to pilots?
I mean, I'd still write the acoustics articles, and I do put in a lot of advice there. Yeah. But one of my personal gripes is that people should not put their brake handles on their wrist.
Here. Hats off to that one as well, yes.
Because, even some schools teach that, to put brake handles on the wrist. And the problem with it is, that then it becomes hard to put your brakes up, A lot of the flying is putting your brakes up.
Yeah.
And as soon as you get an accidental stall, for example, deep stall or anything like that, you really need to put your brakes up. And when you have your hands on the wrist, you really can't.
No. And I've seen them go up the arm and get caught above the elbow. And then suddenly you've got a brake that's halfway at your arm because the glider lost pressure, the brake handle moved.
And this is one thing which I try to, I've written many articles about it. I try to push the federations in this direction, but I don't know. Nobody wants to listen about this, Yeah. And for me, it's a major cause of accidents. Really is. It's okay if you're flying a speed wing, or you're an acro pilot and you need to do acro maneuvers or something, but for 97% of the pilots, putting your brakes on the wrist is a very bad idea, and really should not be done. So that's a personal thing which I find, I don't know, it seems to get missed all the time by people.
I must admit, I see it myself, and I'm the same as you. That's what our hands are for. They're for taking in our hands, they're for holding on our hands.
Just don't put the handle past the thumb.
Yeah, there you go.
You keep it, and then you can take wraps and release it easily.
Yeah. And your articles, are they still? It's Cross Country magazine.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anywhere else people can find your articles as well?
Yeah, in Thermic magazine in Germany,
right.
And also published in Japan.
I remember thinking years ago, because you're right, in every edition.
Yes.
And I remember saying to a friend of mine, how do you manage to keep coming up with so much content? It must be quite difficult at the end of the month to go, oh, I've got to write my article for Cross Country. And
it's 2 months.
It's every 2 months.
2 months.
Oh, there we go. Do you find it hard to...
I do skip some sometimes if I don't have a really, a new topic. But they just come to me, when I'm flying. I said, nobody's mentioned that. Nobody's ever talked about that. I better talk about it.
Yeah.
And the newest one I just come up with is asymmetric spiral. I started to do it myself quite a lot, and it's fun to do.
And that's pulling
it's not pulling a collapse. No, it's just doing a spiral. It's a bit like doing a wing over spiral, wing over spiral, wing out. So it's like a spiral, but not just going regularly down. You're doing a wing over, and then doing a wing over in the same direction again in the opposite, in the other side.
Speeding
up, slowing down, speeding up, slowing down. And first of all, this is the best way to learn wing overs, because you don't have the danger of cravat problems if you get it wrong. And so if you can master asymmetric spirals, then wing overs come quite easily after that. So it's the safest way to learn a wing over. And secondly, it's I don't really like doing straight spirals, because the G-forces get very high and you can almost feel like you're going to black out. Whereas when you do an asymmetric spiral, it's like, you've got a G-force and no G-force and G-force. And so it's much more gentle and more fun and nice to do. And I don't know, I never heard anybody talking about asymmetric spirals before. And the more I start doing them, the more I enjoy it. And I think it's a great thing to learn for SRV as well. So it's a safe maneuver, and nicer than doing spirals, and safer than doing wing overs as well. Yeah, and it's a good way to come down as well. Yeah, and a lot more manageable. Yeah, physically and mentally manageable. Yeah, and I don't know. It just seems to be nobody talks about it. So let's start talking about it. Here we go. Yeah, we've got it on this platform now for people to take on board. Something else I wanted to talk to you as well about, Bruce, is I believe you're the president of API, the APPI Association. Which is the International Paraglider Pilots Association. So we have the British Paragliding Association, the BHPA in the UK. API is more of an international body, is that correct? Yeah, it was actually started in Nepal, because in Nepal at the time they didn't have any association as such, but there was an awful lot of instructors from Europe in Nepal, and it was David Arafat who actually started the API, and he's Swiss, and so there was a group of these instructors, kind of some French, some Swiss, and they decided to make their own association, and it was really tailored for countries which don't have their own paragliding association, and so they created this association, and it was just absolutely founded on being completely international. So, for instance, if you go to Aludinese to do an SOV course, this often causes a problem for the federations in Britain, like the DHV or the BHPA. They go, well, unless you've got a British instructor, how are we going to know that? Yeah. And so all the European federations tend to be, kind of insular. They're not really working together or accepting each other's qualifications, and this was a reaction against that, to try and make something which was worldwide and kind of also based on feedback over the internet, so that you would rate your instructor and the instructor would rate the student, and then that data was then used to make better students, better instructors, and so it was a very modern kind of way to create an association. And API's been growing stronger and stronger over the last few years, and now it's the official teaching method in 10 different countries around the world. The biggest of which is India, so that's pretty huge, and it really is very good in countries where there's no strong association existing. So it's mainly outside Europe. And so, you know, a country outside Europe like India, you know, they can say, well, we want to take on the API system, and then they have way of teaching their instructors, they have a qualification system, they have online courses to teach people, and online exams. So overall it's just becoming stronger and stronger. And Manu Bonte is...
I know Manu, yeah.
You know Manu well,
Yes, yeah.
He's very much the driving force behind it, and all the educational methods that they use, and all the questionnaires and the website and things like that. And he's personally teaching an awful lot of instructors all over the world.
And it's a way of standardising the training, I guess, as well, so that
Yes.
there's a more level playing field with pilots training, you know, silly things like not putting brakes over your wrist, or certain ways of techniques of soaring, techniques of teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. A sort of, a centralised, standardised method of teaching paragliding worldwide.
And it covers everything. So it covers the initial courses. I believe it covers SIV as well. It's a big, broad range.
And they're also doing. It also covers training for service centres as well, which is the first training for service centres which exists, and that's very current at the moment because PMA is trying to draw up standards for service centres, and so is the French Federation, and and API's been working on this as well for 3 or 4 years now. Yeah.
That brings me seamlessly onto my last point before we wrap it up. Is, service centres, you send your glider away, they do a line check. But there's something I've been hearing recently, and there was an accident that I witnessed almost a year ago this month, where an old glider, a 10-year-old glider, it was a kind of one of the original cross between paramotor paragliding gliders, trimmers on, it's paragliding, trimmers off, it's reflex, it's paramotor wing. And after the accident, there was a lot of talk about the possibility of something that was being called fabric warping. Or, I've started to notice, as the sport goes on, the more years that we've been doing the sport, the older gliders get. There was a guy with a 1993, and in a very colourful harness, very colourful. Do you remember the very old and original in Galitzin this year? We were going up, quite a windy launch, it's quite a rough day. And this old Austrian guy was stood there with his colourful big reserve on the side.
1990s stuff.
It was a 1993. I can't remember what make the glider was. And he took off. And to be fair, he took off, just clinged on to the risers the whole way, bounced around in the bumpy air, landed in the field at the bottom.
It was all right.
It was a joy to see him down. But it was literally like watching a vintage car go past. However, what's your opinion on how long can you let a glider age for? Is there things in the testing you can always pick up to protect pilots against aging gliders? Have you come across this concept of glider fabric warping where...
Yeah, absolutely. There's the three, for the cloth, it's mainly tear strength, porosity and deformation, the three areas where the cloth can degrade over time. Yeah. And any one of those three, in fact, normally, as you say, it's the sail going out of shape is probably the worst thing for the safety of the glider. Okay. But it's very difficult to measure.
Yes, and this seems to be, because this was believed to be the cause of the accident a year ago. But it had a test certificate 3 months prior where there was some trimming done on the lines, there were some adjustments done on the lines, there were some adjustments done on the brakes. And the porosity was okay. But it still had this horrendous reaction, got the pilot into trouble at a very, undeservedly so, very low altitude, and unfortunately hit the deck. Now, he survived. But when I took it to our service centre in Algodonales, and I had a chat to a couple of people, that this thing about this glider warping now in older gliders and depending on materials,
going out of shape.
Yeah.
The best I mean, in a situation like that, the best is to test the glider after the accident. I mean, not in the service centre, but fly it and do EN certification tests on it to find out if it's still a safe glider to fly or not. Yeah, that's really the best way to tell.
And so your opinions on, I mean, obviously regularly service them, but I mean, do you have a cut-off point where you say actually a glider over so long is, it's a very difficult one to say, I guess, because of the differences in materials, but.
Yeah, I mean, the aging of gliders is, it's a very difficult subject. I mean, the first question is, how long should a glider last? It's a good question. And I spoke to one manufacturer recently, and they said, we count 6 years as the average life of a glider.
Because it must be very difficult. A pilot in the UK, a pilot in Australia, a pilot in Colombia, a pilot in Alga Denales, 101 different, grassy hilltops, rocky, dusty ones, lots of sunshine, lots of damp air.
Well, the worst thing is humidity, flying near the coast. Yeah. It's really the worst thing. And damp, if you put your glider away damp, I say it's got 24 hours in the bag before it's, starts going mouldy.
Really, yeah. Yes. It has that bigger.
That's really the worst thing is mould in the gliders is really terrible.
And it's something that breaks my heart as you see pilots out on a UK hillside, for example, the grass is wet, they've been sitting on their harness, with their reserve, it's all mopping up the water, and then they pack their glider at the end of the day, that's not going to come out for another 6 months. Yeah,
I mean, the most important thing is to air that glider out, dry it, spread it over the living room that night, just make sure it's dry, it's not a problem that it's wet. Yeah. The main thing is that it has to be dry when you pack it away, and don't leave it more than 24 hours wet in the bag. Yeah. But the other thing is that people often say, I've only got 5 hours on this or 10 hours, but number of flights is just as important as hours. Yeah. Because and ground handling is worse than flying, of course. Yeah. And then of course the absolute worst thing is what they call ground loops. When you
spinning it
around on the takeoff, you do a ground loop so easy just to shred the whole tip off the glider.
I had an acro glider. I lent it to someone in Turkey. Now Turkey has quite an abrasive launch, and he took the glider up, and I got a call from my launch marshal saying, "Dude, I've got to tell you, this guy was trying to do the spins of the glider, and he destroyed my leading edge. He ended up buying the glider, taping it and buying it. Completely destroyed my leading edge." And when you say ground handling's worse, that's just because the glider's up and down on the ground, or it's being dragged around.
Or being dragged around, and just abrasion on the ground, dirt. So it's and also a number of times you take the glider out and pack it away. It's just as important as the hours it's flown.
And leaving it, so I used to get home with mine, and I would take it out. I would just kind of lay it out. So I try and keep my gliders in my upstairs room in mushroom sacks.
Yes, that's great.
Am I right thinking that, or is if they're nice and tight in a bag and you leave them there for 6 months, is it better just to have them nice and mushroom? Is it better? Does it make much of a difference? Because these are all the little arguments you hear in the back of the van. Well, I let mine out when I get home. Well, I pack mine up. I put mine in the loft. I put mine in the shed. There's so many different opinions of
keep it dry. That's really
keep it dry.
Keep it dry. Yeah. Not boiling hot in the car.
Which I just noticed in my parked outside your place today, when it's been 30 odd degrees today, and I suddenly got in the car and that's been sat there all day. So having the window wound down, not sitting on a site and leaving it there.
But humidity is absolutely the worst thing, It really is, humidity. Yeah. I mean, UV, but humidity can destroy a glider so much faster than UV. Yeah. UV, you're going to do 300, 500,000 hours, Yeah. But humidity, you can just leave it wet for 3 days and it's just finished.
Wow, there we go, folks. See, that I think is some of the most golden information we've had on the show so far, because it's something that people talk about so much. So it's really important. UK pilots, we are unfortunately in damp grass situations from time to time, flying at the coast. There's some beautiful coastal sites in the UK. It's really worth drying the glider. Don't pack it away, leave it for 6 months. And
a lot of schools have dehumidifiers in their glider storage.
Yes, we used to have one at Fly Spain. Yeah, I remember. There you go. I think that's a bit of absolute a nugget of golden information there, Bruce.
Okay. Well, nice to speak to you.
You too. We've got to wrap it up, but it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. And, and thank you for having me along. It's lovely to meet the team today. It's lovely to take my first trip up to Gordon and see where the magic happens. Yeah, I really appreciate you having along, buddy. And hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Yeah.
So there we go. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for this episode. Many thanks to Bruce Goldsmith, Anna, and the whole BGT team for their hospitality. What an incredible couple of days I got to spend with the BGT team. An awesome family. Although this one's over, don't you worry. We've got plenty coming up. We have Jockey Sanderson, we have Theo de Blick, we have host Luc Devort, fresh from the last round of the World Acro Tour. So plenty coming your way. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. We'd really appreciate it if you'd share the word about the paragliding debrief, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.